Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, Storm Watch, a winter wake-up call for tens of millions of Americans this morning. Right now, weather alerts in effect from across the central, southern, and eastern U.S. for a sprawling system bringing snow, floods, and possible tornadoes to several states. We're tracking the conditions and where the storm is headed next. Mixed messages from Eastern Europe this morning. U.S. officials disputing Russia's claims that it's pulling back forces from Ukraine, saying up to 7,000 more Russian troops have just been sent to the border. We have team coverage with the latest. A day of disappointment for Team USA at the Winter Olympics. The women's hockey team taking home silver, failing to defend their Olympic gold against Canada. Plus, Michaela Schifrin out again in her final solo event. We'll take you to China for the highlights. And finally, legendary, a one-on-one with the greatest to ever do it. Snowboarding icon and half-pipe hero Shaun White reflecting on retirement after 5 Olympics and 3 gold medals.
You know, I got to really go out on my own terms, so I was so thankful of that. And knowing that going in, it really made everything special.
You will hear much more from him in this interview with, as you can see right there, Joe.
Yes, he is in full retirement mode right now. It'd be nice at his age. But yeah.
He's on his homecoming tour, chilling out.
Going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
He's in a good place right now.
All right, we can't wait to hear more from him in that conversation with you. We begin this morning, though, with the latest on that winter storm making its way across the country.
Millions of Americans are waking up to weather alerts after this storm dumped several inches of snow in the Rocky Mountains yesterday. It's expected to deliver everything from snow and ice across the Great Plains to heavy rain, even tornadoes in some areas in the southeast. This morning, it's the Midwest that's feeling the brunt of the storm, getting hit with strong winds and rain. It's causing significant flooding throughout the region. WMAQ reporter Sandra Torres has more from Chicago, where we're seeing damage caused by the storm.
Well, there was heavy rain overnight in the Chicago area, and it is extremely windy here now as well. Even though the rain has slowed down, there are major flooding issues and also a wall collapse here at this 2-story building located near Midway Airport. And as you can see, a part of the wall collapsed onto this adjacent parking lot. Bricks are scattered all over the ground, and where those bricks are, that's where a couple of vehicles were parked. They were significantly damaged, moved just a short time ago. Now, the collapse was reported just after midnight. Authorities have not confirmed this is weather related, though it is very likely considering the amount of rain that has fallen in this area. The heavy rains have flooded numerous viaducts just blocks from here, and we have reports of several vehicles that were stuck in very deep water as well. Now, the good news here at this wall collapse site, no one was injured. Again, it happened just after midnight, but this is what a lot of people are waking up to here in the Chicago area this morning. Back to you, Savannah and Joe.
Sandra Torres, thank you so much. Let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Bill Cairns is with us to tell us about the latest storm updates. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. We've had severe storms overnight through Texas. We're tracking those today into the south. Tornadoes are a big threat today, along with the icy conditions and the travel problems that you get driving in the snow, too. And then the rainfall is going to have its own issues with all the flooding. So the storm right now stretches from North Texas all the way into northern Maine, with everyone in between getting a little bit of something. Notice all the lightning strikes on this map, too. This is a very juicy atmosphere it's working with. In other words, the atmosphere is very warm and it's humid throughout the south. And that's why we're going to get a chance of some severe storms even as we go throughout the morning, afternoon, and even into tonight. The blue on this map and the white shows you where the heavy snow is. It's not a fun drive from Wichita to Kansas City right now. A very difficult morning commute developing in areas of Springfield northwards to central Missouri. That's where the ice is starting. And how about these numbers? I mean, just the wind alerts alone with this storm is 111 million people. That's like 1 in every 3 Americans. Winter weather, 43 million. Flood alerts, 38 million. And some unlucky people are under both at the same time. This is the map of greatest concern. If we do get tornadoes later today, most likely they would occur in that orangish color from Memphis to Nashville, Tupelo, just outside of Birmingham, to Greenville, Mississippi, down to Jackson, Mississippi. That's where we could have even an isolated strong tornado later on this afternoon. Everywhere in the yellow, though, you still could get some strong gusty winds and hail with these storms. As far as the rainfall goes, and we're worried about the snow melt, the rain, and then all that water heads into our rivers, and some of the rivers are frozen with ice. So if we get the ice breaking up, we get ice jams, you get it. It's a mess potentially in the Ohio Valley and western New York. That's where we're under flood watches, and then 1 to 3 inches of rainfall is expected today and tonight. Now we're also going to see the cold air moving in. So not all of it's going to fall as rain. Some will be freezing rain, and that's from St. Louis to Indianapolis, Columbus up to Cleveland, potentially a 1/4 inch of ice. The rule of thumb is a 1/4 inch of ice, you get some power, some minor power outages. Once you get up to a 1/2 inch, you get major. So I think we're going to avoid that, but it'll be a close call. And as far as the snow goes, the heaviest snow this morning, Wichita to Kansas City, this afternoon just north of St. Louis up to Decatur. As of now, Chicago, you're on the edge of the heavier snows. We have you right around 2 to 3 inches of snow, but just to your south, you could easily pick up a 1/2 foot, and that does include our friends in areas like Detroit. So you guessed it, guys, today. It's a wild ride out there for everyone's transportation needs across the middle of the country. East Coast, you can feel it's a little unusually warm today, too. And that's that same storm pumping all that warm air into the Northeast.
Wow, lots going on. Thank you, Bill. We'll check in on that next hour as well.
Too much.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. This morning, there's a potentially worrying new development amid the rising tensions in Eastern Europe. Ukraine and Russian-backed rebels in the east of the country are trading accusations that each side has fired across an existing ceasefire line. That's according to Reuters. There's also more doubt being cast over Russia's claims it has been pulling back some troops from the Ukrainian border. Russia's defense ministry released this video today, which it says shows tanks returning to their home bases after completing exercises. But last night, a senior Biden administration official disputed Moscow's claims, saying, quote, "We now know it was false." In fact, that official said the opposite, that as many as 7,000 troops have been added at the border, some as recently as Wednesday. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in central Ukraine for us this morning, and NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin joins us from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Good morning to both of you. Matt, I want to start with you and these reports I just mentioned where we're seeing alleged exchange of fire in eastern Ukraine. Now, this is an area that has had this existing separatist conflict ongoing. This is separate from the current Russian troop buildup. But what do we know at this stage, and what could this potentially mean?
Yeah, I mean, Savannah, the short answer is not a whole lot. What we do know is that both sides are blaming each other, as you just mentioned. We heard from the Ukrainian army that 3 employees of this kindergarten were injured. It's kind of amazing that no children were hurt, because we understand that there were children around. But again, they said that there were 32 122 millimeter shells that were fired from the separatist enclave. And again, this has been cleaved out of Ukraine for the past 8 years, ever since Russia first invaded back in 2014. So again, these sorts of exchange of fires, they actually happen fairly regularly. They're not new, they're not unique, but they rarely involve civilians. And this one is unique because, of course, and kind of goes without saying, tensions are sky high. And that's one thing that we keep hearing from military analysts and from U.S. intelligence, is that Vladimir Putin and the Russians are waiting to just create a casus belli, a pretext for war. And this is part of their playbook. They did this in Georgia back in 2008 when Russian troops went into that country and cleaved off a part of that country. So what they really want is for some minor incident, some minor skirmish, to create a reaction or foment a reaction from the Ukrainians, and then that would allow them to say, okay, well, we're going to have a reaction ourselves. We're going to go in and defend ourselves or defend the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine. It's just part of the playbook. We've seen it done before, and that's the big concern here. Guys?
Yeah, Aaron, I want to ask you more about this and this potential for using this as this justification for invasion that we're concerned about. While these details are still unclear about exactly what is going on within this separatist area, we have heard these multiple warnings of so-called false flag operations. Tell us about those and how concerned the government in Kyiv is about that, and are there fears on the ground of this potentially escalating things?
Well, speaking to Ukrainian military experts here in Kyiv, and they are extraordinarily concerned about the possibility of an escalation in eastern Ukraine. In fact, they see that as a high probability going forward. So obviously the military here is watching the situation extremely closely. They're also concerned about those so-called false flag operations. U.S. officials also have been very vocal about that. Earlier in the month, the United States actually divulging its intelligence about a potential false false flag operation they were alleging was being cooked up by Moscow, involving a graphic video as well as actors' fake blood. Now, no one outside of the United States has seen that video, but false flags remain a concern going forward. Doesn't seem like that was the motive behind today's escalation, given that the kindergarten question was shelled on the government side of the line. But I was speaking to Ukrainian military experts, and they say yes, false flags are a concern. However, the more that we talk about them, the more that they are raised in conversations, the less of a surprise they will be, and the less likely in the eyes of people here in Kyiv that the Kremlin will use that as a tactic.
Matt, now I want to ask you about this other concerning headline. So U.S. officials continuing to dispute these claims by Russia that it's been pulling back some of its forces from the Ukrainian border. So tell us, I mean, they're actually saying that Russia is in fact adding more, right?
Yeah, I mean, there had been some optimism for the last 2 days here in Ukraine, especially from the western side, from Washington, from London. It had looked like this whole situation was kind of deflating a little bit. But now we're starting to see that there was a pinprick into that. And now Western capitals are saying that it looks as though there's no evidence that the Russia is withdrawing troops, as they kind of said that they would or implied that they would. Instead, we're hearing from Washington that there's another 7,000 troops being added on top of the 150,000 that President Joe Biden said were already there. That number itself was kind of surprising, since we at NBC and others hadn't really gone above 130,000 before that. So really, we're seeing more and more troops accumulating, even as Russia is saying that they're withdrawing and releasing these fresh videos showing what they describe as troops withdrawing. But those are hard to verify. The only people who are able to show any evidence are the Russians themselves. So it's hard to really believe them. The best indications that temperatures are cooling around this conflict are just from the words of the Russian officials themselves, who have opened more space for diplomacy and said that they're going to be partially withdrawing troops and returning them to their so-called permanent positions. But beyond that, there isn't much on-the-ground evidence, and that's something that, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It's something we'd have to wait for, and it's something that Western officials say, we can't just believe this now. We have to wait for really firm evidence. And Ukrainian officials are saying that too, guys.
Aaron, let's talk a little bit more about the diplomacy side of this. NATO defense ministers have been meeting today for another round of talks. What's the latest there?
Yeah, that meeting is now underway. It was started with remarks from the NATO Secretary General reiterating what we've heard from U.S. officials as well as Ukrainian officials, that they have seen no signs of a Russian military withdrawal as yet. NATO, of course, is at the center of this current crisis, with Russian President Vladimir Putin demanding that Ukraine not be allowed to be a member of NATO, effectively be ruled out, something that the United States has rejected as a demand, as has Ukraine. We heard from President Zelensky just this morning in an interview with the BBC say that NATO membership is essential to guaranteeing the safety of Ukraine. It is worth noting it is also part of the Ukrainian constitution. So how this square is circled, of course, remains to be seen. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, today saying that Russia is sending its response to the U.S. proposal later today. Guys.
All right, Aaron and Matt, thank you so much.
The battle over masks is growing. More counties and states are lifting their mask mandates, even though the CDC is calling those moves premature. But this morning, the agency is facing pressure to review its own guidance.
We are looking at an overview of much of our guidance, and masking in all settings will be a part of that. We want to give people a break from things like mask wearing when these metrics are better.
Let's bring in senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, Dr. Amir. Doctor, good to have you with us. So we just heard from CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky there, who said the metrics need to be better. What kind of benchmarks are we looking at here?
I think they really need to change the benchmarks that they're looking at, because when you look at the country, everybody has substantial and high transmission, but and I just worked overnight in the hospital, it's a very different situation. So I think that the CDC needs to change its public health guidance to be more focused on severe disease, ICU capacity, and hospitalization numbers, not the sheer number of cases, because those are going to go up and down. And we've got so many tools to deal with COVID-19. It's not the same thing as it was even several months ago. So I think the calibration has to change over what is going to drive public health guidance, and I think it should be severe disease, not just cases.
The Speaking of safety precautions, the Coachella and Stagecoach Festival say they're no longer going to require masks, negative COVID tests, or even proof of vaccination to get in this year. So in your mind, will it be safe to attend because it's largely an outdoor event, or should we be concerned about possible super spreaders?
We know that outdoor transmission is less likely than in indoor situations. And we know that we've got tools like monoclonal antibodies, antivirals, and a significant proportion of the population either vaccinated or with immunity. So I do think that a lot of these events are going to go this way, and it's going to really come down to risk tolerance. If you're somebody that's high risk, that might be something that you might not want to go to, or you may want to make sure that you're wearing a mask and taking those precautions. But for others, it may be less risky. So I think what we're going to see in general is a transition to COVID becoming something about your own personal risk tolerance, taking those personal protective measures that you yourself find useful and other people may not, because we are at a place where we've got a lot of different tools that we did not have in the early days, and that changes how we think about COVID-19. It's becoming more like other respiratory viruses.
Over the last 2 years, we've seen how loneliness, stress, depression from the pandemic are taking a toll on the mental health of so many Americans. Well, now a new study published in the British Medical Journal said COVID itself could also increase the risk of developing mental health problems. What more can you tell us about this study?
So this study was done in the Veterans Affairs medical system, meaning these were veterans who had COVID-19. And what they found was that there was a higher level of anxiety, depression, opioid use disorder in those individuals with COVID-19. And this may have to do with something regarding the neuroinflammation, the inflammation that occurs in your central nervous system in your brain with COVID. It's still an early study, even though it's pretty robust. There's a lot of caveats. We've got to make sure that, first of all, that this is applicable to the general population, because the VA population is very different. It tends to be white males, and that might not necessarily apply to the rest of the population. And there is something called ascertainment bias, that when you're getting admitted for COVID, you're going to get screened for mental health disorders. Are they picking up more just because people are getting more healthcare contact? But I think it's an interesting study, and I think it's something that needs to be replicated in a more heterogeneous population, not just the VA. But I think it really shows that COVID-19 is not something you want to get, and getting vaccinated is a way to prevent any of these complications from occurring.
Still so much we're learning about the impacts of COVID. Thank you so much, Dr. Amish Adalja. We appreciate it. And if you, our viewers, have a question for one of our doctors, you can let us know. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions, and you can let us know if you want to stay anonymous.
Now to more COVID news. Texas is suing the Biden administration and the CDC over the enforcement of its federal transportation mask mandate. And that's just a month before it's set to expire. The lawsuit, filed by Attorney General Ken Paxton and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, challenges the constitutionality of the mandate, with Paxton claiming the policy violates the individual liberties of Texans. The mandate was put into place by the administration back in February of 2021, and it's been extended several times since. This comes as we've seen more and more states start to loosen those mask mandate protocols on their own. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delanian joins us now with the latest on this. Hey, Ken, good morning. So walk us through this lawsuit, what exactly Texas is arguing here, but then also why it's coming nearly a year after the policy went into effect. And as I mentioned right before, it's set to expire, though it could be extended again.
Good morning, Savannah. This is a federal lawsuit filed in the Northern District of Texas in Fort Worth by the very conservative Texas Attorney General and a Republican member of Congress. It's funded by a conservative think tank, and it argues that the CDC exceeded its legal authority in imposing this mask mandate, and it also argues that there's no evidence that masks actually prevent the spread of COVID, the interstate spread, as the lawsuit put it. And it points out that this is a mask mandate that applies to people who, whether they have COVID or not, whether they're vaccinated or not, and it says that that's improper. As to why it's coming now, we can only speculate. The political climate for masks certainly has changed. People are growing tired of wearing masks. The issue here, though, this is a pretty narrow mandate. It's not a national mask mandate. It's a mandate on transportation conveyances, airplanes, trains, taxis, Ubers, places where people are in close proximity. So the legal standard here is probably different from other kinds of more broad mask mandates. Nonetheless, though, this is going to be something the Biden administration is going to have to fight in court, Savannah.
Now, Ken, you mentioned this, but this is this federal mandate, the key word there being federal, that Texas is going after. And as I mentioned, it's happening as we're seeing these mask mandates lifted across the country at the state level. What's the significance here of Texas choosing to challenge a federal mandate?
Well, for one thing, they could make future law. If this reaches the Supreme Court, it could have implications for federal action in future pandemics. It could sort of outline the limits of federal authority. And it's coming at a time where politically mask mandates are increasingly coming under challenge. In the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, for example, blocked a mask mandate in schools there. So, it's just another sort of legal battle here that could have implications for how the government deals with future pandemics.
And Ken, this actually isn't the first time that the state has sued the Biden administration over COVID protocols. How did those cases turn out? What were they about? And what does it mean potentially for the future of this lawsuit?
Right. Well, Texas was one of the states that sued to block the Biden administration's vaccine mandate on all employers. And as you know, the Supreme Court struck that down in January, giving Texas and other states a victory. That obviously was a much different legal issue, a much more expansive use of federal power there to mandate that all workers get a vaccine as opposed to wearing a mask. But scholars have said the legal issues may be similar in the sense that the Biden administration, for example, never attempted a national mask mandate because they didn't think they had the authority there. The question in this lawsuit will be, do they have the authority to mandate even on airplanes and in taxis and on trains, Savannah?
All right, Ken Delaney, and thank you so much.
Coming up on Morning News Now, on thin ice, Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva returns to the rink tonight as controversy grows over her failed drug test.
And more than just games, a look at the role politics plays in the Olympics and why you won't see any U.S. officials at the closing ceremony this weekend after the break.
Day 13 at the Winter Olympics has been both lucky and unlucky for Team USA.
Yeah, that's right. But there are still plenty of opportunities for Americans to take home some hardware before the games wind down this weekend. Joining us again this morning is NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson from just outside Beijing. Hey, Steve, good morning. Thank you once again for being out in the cold for us. All right, let's start with that crushing loss for Team USA in women's hockey against Canada. What were some of the big takeaways from that game that gave them silver?
You know, Savannah, I know you like to make fun of me when I say this, but I was there. We're stationed here in the mountains. Beijing proper is about a bullet train. It's about a bullet train right away. And it's one of those things where if you're anywhere in the country, you have to go to this thing because the electricity, the intensity, the animosity between these two teams, these are two teams of women that hate each other, and you can feel it. And frankly, that makes for some great hockey, and that's what we saw. It was a very competitive game, a very hard-hitting game, back and forth. The Americans, pushing Canada really in those final few moments to try to get another goal, to try to tie things up. Unfortunately, they just couldn't. But one of the other things you felt there, is just kind of this sense of inevitability with Canada this year. They're just so good. They've scored 57 points in this tournament. I think their opponents, including the U.S., have scored 10. And every time they got the puck, and this is what being there does, Savannah, you feel like they're going to score. And because you're there, there's like this whole energy of the team. It just feels like they're going to score every time they got the puck. It was almost miraculous that the U.S. made as many stops as they did, that they put as many points on their goaltender as they did, because of just how good and how dominant and how fast Canada really felt this year. But, this is a rivalry, so we'll be back. Canada has 5, we have 2. It's this glorious thing that happens every few years or so, and we can't wait to be there for the next one. And the U.S. wins silver. They did so great this year.
Yeah.
And it's obviously then USA's turn to win gold the next time around, because that's obviously how it's working out.
Here we come.
All right, let's stay on the ice here, Steve. One of the most highly anticipated events of the Olympics normally comes to an end tonight, the women's figure skating free skate, especially with the drama this year. So what happens if the Russian skater at the center of all this controversy comes out on top?
Well, since we're on the theme of inevitability, I think we more need to frame this in terms of when it happens and not necessarily if it happens. There is the possibility that something catastrophic does happen and 15-year-old Kamila Valieva does not win this, but it's looking like she will. She really locked it up with a very solid performance in her first attempt and now her second attempt, and those two are very cumulative. In other words, they count together. So she's got a huge lead. Plus, the way she does these tricks, the quad that she can do, the talent level of the tricks and the routine is just so high that even if she falls or screws up, she's still so good. So, I mean, to put all that into perspective is to say that if she ends up on the podium, there will not be a medal ceremony, full stop. That's kind of the deal here. They let her perform because this is still very much under investigation. There was a panel to meet to talk about whether or not she could still compete. They decided yes, because there's still so many things and questions up in the air about this. But the payoff, the trade-off is if she medals, and it looks like she will, and probably her teammate will, and maybe her other teammate will, there will be no ceremony, which a lot of people are upset about, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve. I hate to ask this last question. I hate to keep talking about skier Michaela Schifrin having a hard time because we feel for her, but I know people are wondering what happened earlier today. I know she didn't have such a great run again.
Yeah, I've been kind of dreading this conversation, and saying she didn't have a great run is a little bit of an understatement. This is kind of, barring a massive injury or an avalanche, this is maybe the worst case scenario for her. This is the slalom, part of the combined event, which she was actually supposed to do well in, and this is Michaela Schifrin. She's supposed to do well in all of these events. And again, she did not finish. She hit a gate and crashed into the snow. This is the third time in 2 weeks that she has not finished. And all of these events are slalom events. These are her trademark events. To say this Olympics is anything less than a nightmare for her, I think would be disingenuous. Now, I think we can talk about this from the mental health standpoint of the pressure that these athletes are under, and especially her. She was so hyped up coming into this, and you could see that the slalom events are the ones that she hasn't finished, so it's mental. And hopefully she can recover and, just have fun with the rest of her time. And it looks like she's still a strong skier and she can still do this. And you get that sense from her in the interview, so hopefully she just pushes through. Guys?
Absolutely.
She's a fighter.
She was, yeah. And she was actually really gracious after even that happened and said, everything else in my time here has been good. So, tough to see, though.
All right. Steve, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, during Sunday's Olympic closing ceremony, just like at the opening ceremony, there won't be any U.S. politicians or officials in the stands cheering on Team USA. That's because the U.S. is one of 10 countries that declared a diplomatic boycott of the Games.
Yeah, it's not the first time the U.S. has boycotted an Olympics. So why are the athletes still competing this time? And what does this stance hope to achieve? Well, we took a look at past Olympic boycotts to find out.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games, given the PRC's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses.
That's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki announcing a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Games back in December, saying the administration would cheer on the athletes from home, but wouldn't contribute to the fanfare of the Games. Countries including Canada, Britain, and Australia followed America's lead. Responding, China said the decision violated the spirit of the Games. The country denies genocide and human rights abuses against the Uyghurs.
Boycott of the Summer Olympic Games in Moscow.
This actually isn't the first U.S.-led boycott of the Olympics. More than 40 years ago, there was another, but that one included the athletes.
If the Soviets do not withdraw their troops immediately from Afghanistan within a month, I would not support the sending of an American team to the Olympics. It's very important for the world to realize how serious a threat the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan is.
President Carter went through with his threat, and in the end, more than 60 nations did not participate in the 1980 Moscow Summer Olympics. So what do officials from the Carter administration think of the move now?
I know that President Carter does not have any regrets. He feels that while it was one of his most difficult decisions, it's one he had to make. It was painful for him to make it, but he thinks that it was an important statement at an important point in time.
An important statement, but did it make a difference?
It didn't end the Cold War. It didn't lead the Soviets to withdraw, but it was clearly a chink in their armor. So it didn't have a short-term impact, but I think in the long term, it did weaken the Soviet Union.
The full boycott of the Moscow Games meant athletes were caught in the middle of politics.
The majority of Olympians only ever compete in one Olympic Games. And so for an athlete, if 1980 was their one shot and they did not have that chance, very few of them were able to then qualify for 1984, for instance. And so the athletes were the biggest losers in that respect.
So what does history suggest this Olympic boycott will achieve?
Sporting boycotts have almost never led to actual changes politically. There have been a few, very few rare instances where it has, but on the whole, they have not led to political changes. Also, this sense that whatever happens, is not going to change the Chinese government and their actions.
But boycott or not, speaking out brings attention and awareness to the issues at hand.
The fact that the Olympics are in China has actually brought much greater publicity. This has been happening for years, but it has been fairly quiet on a global on a global radar. So the Olympics, with that increased scrutiny on China, has brought greater attention to these issues.
All right, and coming up, new developments in the death of Bob Saget after a judge blocks the release of some of his death records.
Plus, anger and a call to action by the family of a man shot and killed by Minneapolis police. You're watching Morning News Now.
Okay, if you've ever watched a Disney movie or strolled through Disneyland and thought, I wish I could live here, well, here's sort of your chance. The Imagineers are cooking up a new residential community out in California's Coachella Valley called Cotino. The neighborhood will be built around a huge 24-acre oasis and will have homes ranging from smaller condos to bigger estates. Of course, any Disney endeavor has to include entertainment, and Cotino is no different. There will be regular community events like cooking classes, live performances, and look at that, beach access in the middle of the desert, by the way, for members of the community club. Disney says this is just the first of several communities they plan to build across the country. No word yet on when you can move in, but stay tuned to learn how you can live your happily ever after. Joe, you're a Disney fan like I am. Are you moving in?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the little known rule people don't realize, you have to sing and skip when you take a walk outside. I don't know if that's going to work for everyone.
Yeah, it's always cheery. That's the only way to live in Disney neighborhood. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah.
New questions are emerging this morning about what led up to the death of beloved comedian and actor Bob Saget. His family filed a lawsuit to prevent the release of certain records related to his death. On Wednesday, a judge ruled in their favor. NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest.
A Florida judge sided with Bob Saget's family, blocking the release of records related to the comedian's death. The judge writing, the court finds that plaintiffs will suffer irreparable harm in the form of severe mental pain, anguish, and emotional distress if the requested temporary injunction is not granted.
Well, what do you think? Do I look ready for my big date or what?
America's beloved TV dad was found dead last month in an Orlando area hotel room. On Tuesday, citing privacy concerns, his widow and 3 daughters sued Florida investigators to stop the release of photographs, video recordings, audio recordings, and statutorily protected autopsy information because they, quote, graphically depict Saget. In response, the Orange County Sheriff's Office says while we are sensitive to the family's concerns about the right to privacy, that must be balanced with our commitment to transparency. Last week, Saget's family revealed his cause of death as accidental head trauma. In the autopsy, the Florida medical examiner confirmed that, adding the 65-year-old likely fell backwards, suffering injuries to the back of his head, causing bleeding in different parts of the brain and multiple fractures on his head and around his eyes. Still, experts say Saget's head was so badly injured, it's unlikely he would have ignored it.
Based on the injuries he had in the autopsy and how severe those injuries are, it's hard to imagine him actually walking anywhere and even having anything sort of a thought process going on.
The autopsy found no evidence of foul play or illicit drugs in Saget's system. Back to you.
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you.
Now, the funeral for 22-year-old Amir Locke is set to be held later today in Minneapolis, with Reverend Al Sharpton leading the service. Locke was fatally shot during a no-knock warrant search executed by a Minneapolis SWAT team. The Locke family is speaking out, calling the incident, quote, an execution. The mayor has implemented a moratorium on no-knock warrants while the state investigates the shooting. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen joins us now from Minneapolis with more on what to expect. Hi, Ron. Good morning. So what do you think we'll see today? Will we hear from the Locke family during this funeral?
I would think so, yes. I would think there'll be a lot of personal tributes and remembrances of him, a 22-year-old man who, by all accounts, his family says was a good person and totally innocent and a victim in this whole circumstance. He was a DoorDash delivery man who was legally licensed to carry the gun that he had in his possession when the police stormed into this apartment where he was sleeping on a couch. It wasn't his apartment, it was that of a friend. And he was not the target of this warrant. The police were going after a cousin of his. And so in many ways, the family was emphasizing how this never should have happened. So, yes, we expect to hear from the family. We expect to hear from a lot of civil rights and activists for racial justice. We know that Reverend Al Sharpton is going to deliver the eulogy. The third time that he's delivered a eulogy in this town. In the case of George Floyd, Daunte Wright's funeral happened in this same church about a year or so ago. And we know that the officer who was convicted of manslaughter in Wright's case, Kim Potter, is going to be sentenced tomorrow. So there's a lot going on here in Minneapolis, and this continues. This case is seen as yet another example of a law enforcement officer using excessive force in killing an innocent young black man. So we'll hear a lot about that and a lot about how this continues to happen. And despite calls for reform, despite investigations, the family and many others are still very angry about what's happening in this town and in other places across the country.
And Ron, when we've seen these other police-involved killings of black men, we've seen what's also happened across the city, this fallout from them. How's the city responding so far to the death of Amir Locke?
A lot of focus is on these investigations. There are calls for the police chief, the interim police chief here, to step down. There are calls for the officer who fired the fatal shots to be fired and charged. That has not happened while the state and local authorities investigate what happened. There have not been massive protests in the streets here. There were some protests right after Locke's death on February 2nd, but there has not been a lot happening publicly out in the streets. A lot of it has been happening behind the scenes, but there is a lot of pressure on the Minneapolis Police Department to not only deal with this case and the individuals who were involved, the officer who fired the shots and the police chief, because of something she said after it happened and the way she's handled the case. But there are calls for reform throughout the department, and we know that that's all going on as well. So again, a lot happening here as this funeral happens in a couple of hours' time.
All right, we know you'll be watching, Ron Allen. Thank you so much.
Coming up on Morning News Now, a man-made disaster. New research shows how much human behavior is driving a major drought.
Plus, a first-of-its-kind solar project that's showing promise. That's after the break.
The first black-owned autonomous grocery store features more than just flashy new tech. Their mission is to bring more healthy options to some of the biggest food deserts in the country, combating health issues like obesity. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander goes inside the high-tech store.
Call it grocery shopping with a taste of technology. Welcome to Nourish and Bloom Market. Here, QR codes, automated gates, and robots run the show.
Say hello.
30 ceiling cameras track your every move.
Every time you pick up an item, the system knows exactly what you've picked up.
So these are basically giant scales throughout
Correct.
the store.
All finished? Just walk right out. Automatic payment through your phone.
So it's quite an unusual experience.
It's the brainchild of first-time store owners Jalea and Jamie Hemmings.
Shopping has changed overall, and we wanted to create a solution for the post-pandemic era that we're living in.
But even more notable than how you shop, what you're shopping for. Just south of Atlanta, this community is a food desert. The closest grocery store, a nearly 15-minute drive. These shelves hold all natural, organic foods, and the customers can't get enough.
We've waited for it so long, it's a godsend.
There's even a fresh spin on delivery.
That's it.
2 climate-controlled robots, complete with their own crosswalk.
Thank you.
They're already planning to expand, eyeing disadvantaged neighborhoods across Georgia and Florida, and thanks to a partnership with Microsoft, offsetting the cost for customers.
When you look at childhood obesity, when you look at diabetes, it really runs in the Black community, and we want to be able to change that.
Our whole mission is that everyone deserves access to healthy food in a convenient way, right? An affordable way.
This is more than a business. This is a mission.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
A mission to keep healthy foods within reach.
There you go.
Blaine Alexander, NBC News, Fayetteville, Georgia.
Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Silvana Henao is with us. Good morning, Silvana.
Hey guys, good morning. Amazon and a group of workers at a warehouse in Staten Island have tentatively agreed to terms for a union election, which organizers say will take place late next month. This puts Amazon on track to face 2 union elections in the same week. The National Labor Relations Board plans to begin counting ballots from an Alabama warehouse in a redo of a failed organizing campaign last year. A vote to unionize at either facility would mark Amazon's first organized warehouse in the United States. The nation's largest chip maker failing to impress investors with its latest earnings report. NVIDIA posting results that beat analysts' forecasts and is projecting strong growth this year, but supply constraints continue to weigh on its data center chip business. Earlier this month, NVIDIA scrapped plans to buy a rival Arm Holdings, a deal that faced opposition from regulators. And Twitter is expanding its mobile tipping feature to include Ethereum this coming month after it added Bitcoin. The tip service lets users send payments, including cryptocurrency, to creators and accounts they follow. It's the latest move by Twitter to expand the use of crypto and blockchain technology. Earlier this year, it started allowing some people to use NFTs as their profile pictures. Guys?
I'm still wrapping my head around the idea of tipping someone on Twitter.
Right?
Like,
NFT is a profile picture.
Thank you, Silvana.
Thanks.
You got it.
So the mega drought in the western U.S. is so severe, it's making history. And a new study says humans are driving it.
That's one of the stories we're following this morning in our series Climate Control, highlighting the need for smart solutions to confront climate change.
NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns is back with us. More on this. Bill, good morning to you. So this mega drought out west has been going on now for 22 years. It shows no signs of letting up right now. How bad is it, and what is the link to human behavior?
Yeah, this is not a record that we wanted to break. It had been well known that the longest lasting mega drought was in the late 1500s, and it was kind of equal to the one we're in right now. But now they've said we've surpassed it, unfortunately, and it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. So let me first explain, maybe you haven't even heard the term mega drought before. So what's a mega drought? Well, a mega drought is a drought that lasts 2 decades or longer, so at least 20 years. And right now we're at year 22 of our drought in the West. And this is the map that shows our current drought. About 95% of the West is in drought. So are humans to blame in greenhouse gas emissions? Well, this study in the Nature journal says 42% of this drought is linked to human-caused warming. And what's even more alarming is they said that this drought would have ended with the wet seasons in probably 2005 and 2006, and it wouldn't have continued straight through without that warming. So, they're saying that humans are to blame for making this mega drought even worse. And because the atmosphere is warmer, it's thirstier. So it evaporates more water from the soil. It kind of bakes the forest, too. And here's one of the more alarming parts of this, guys. In this study, they said there's a 75% chance that this mega drought will last at least 30 years to the year 2030.
Wow. Oof. All right. Now, Bill, we always do, though, even when we're talking about some of this scary, anxiety-inducing part of climate change, want to be talking about solutions as well. So California, one of those states, of course, and part of this map, is launching a pilot program that's going to install solar panel canopies over canals. It's the first project of its kind in the U.S. What should we know about it? What's this going to do?
Well, this isn't just a theory. This actually has been done before, but not in the United States. In India, they actually have 8 projects like this on 24 miles of canals, and they've successfully, limited the evaporation of the water from the canals and gotten energy out of this. So in California, they've just approved the first pilot program. It will begin this fall, and it'll be hopefully completed by 2024 in the San Joaquin Valley. And, so why does California do this? Well, first off, they need the green energy to use less greenhouse gases, especially natural gas. the evaporation is a huge problem. We just talked about the mega drought. They need to conserve the water that they have. So that's good. If you cover it up, the sun evaporates less. And there's a big not in my backyard problem with solar panels. And this land is available. It's not being used except for the passageway of the canals. So the biggest question is, how hard is it to maintain these? Because you can't really get to the canals if they do need maintenance with the projects over the top of them. And these solar panels need to be cleaned. You can see the person watering them there. So we got to figure out efficient ways to get the dust off of them, too.
All right. Bill, thank you so much. We are going to ask you one more question. I don't think we are. All right. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Bill, we love this segment. Thanks so much. Great to have you back.
Next time.
Yeah. All right. Coming up on Morning News Now, getting candid with an Olympic goat.
It's a list of things that I never had time to do, but like once all that kind of settles down, what kind of role do you move into?
Up next, my conversation with snowboarding legend Shaun White, just back from his final Olympics.
Welcome back. Snowboarding icon Shaun White is back in the U.S. after completing his final Olympic competition ever, an experience he says he'll cherish forever.
I spoke to Shaun about his homecoming, including how he's handling the early days of retirement and who he's now looking to for advice. How does his homecoming feel?
It's been incredible, honestly. Like from China, landed at the airport, my whole family and all my friends were waiting, and then straight to the Super Bowl, which was awesome. I actually had a list of things I wanted to do in my retirement, and on that list was I've never been to a Super Bowl. It's my first one. I mean, there's been those moments where you got to pinch yourself and go, wow, maybe I took this for granted before or whatever, and now everything's just got this shimmer to it, especially competing. Saying goodbye to my competitors. I'm sure I'll bump into them, but just to be in that situation with them, it's a rarity, and so I cherish every moment, and yeah, it's just been great.
The fact that you're doing this on your terms, how important is that to you?
It's really big, and knowing that going in, it really made everything special. It's like, okay, wow, well, if I'm going to do it, and this is the last time, this is how I would go about it.
You might have heard it. There's something called mean tweets where celebs mean things. About them. I'm going to do the opposite here.
Oh, yeah?
I'm going to do nice tweets. I'm going to read you the nice things celebrities say about you.
Oh, wow,
so,
right on.
So you've got David Beckham, I think's a friend of yours, right?
He's a friend, yeah.
He's written respect for the greatest. So David Beckham writes that about you. What do you think?
Yeah, the man. I mean, he's a legend, obviously, and to just have support from, fellow athletes like that's incredible. I always have such admiration and respect for other athletes and what they do, and so to hear that's really cool.
Michael Phelps used a goat emoji to describe you. When you see those goat emojis, what goes through your mind?
I love it. I mean, especially from someone of his caliber. I mean, he knows what it's like to put it all out there, and he's retired. He's definitely a phone call I'm going to have pretty soon here. Like, what do I do next?
Speaking of phone calls, Tom Brady said you had an incredible career. That's a phone call you're making, right?
That's a really cool one. Yeah, Tom's amazing, and especially he's going through what I'm going through right now, which is pretty wild.
What are the questions you want to ask him about retirement?
Gosh, I mean, where do you start is where I think I would ask. I mean, once the bubble and the things the dust settles, stuff calms down, especially we're still in the Olympic glow. We're all kidded here right now. You're looking very solid.
Thank you. I'm glowing too. I'm trying my best here.
But what's next? I mean, obviously there's a list of things that I never had time to do, but like once all that kind of settles down, what kind of role do you move into and how do you go forward? Those sort of things, or how do you fight the thoughts of like, well, I could come back for the little, because that was very real for me. I was like,
have you had those thoughts?
Well, of course. I mean, you're in the fight for so many years, and just to take yourself out of it all of a sudden is like a very jarring thing, especially not finishing on the podium or things like that. I was like, okay, well, the fighter in me was very like, well, you could do the, and then your mind starts racing of like how I could navigate that path to come back. But at this point, I'm thankful to be in the position I'm in and learn lessons from fellow competitors like that. I like how to crave those sort of urges and push forward in the new life I'm setting for myself.
He does have a snowboard business to keep him busy. Whitespace, his new business that he's working on. So that's something to keep his time occupied.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll find ways. We'll take him to do anything for us.
I feel like he'll be on TV too. I get that feeling.
Yeah.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.